Perfect. And now I'll hand over to Jeff, who's going to be taking us through the content for today. So over to you, Jeff.
Thanks, Bianca, and good morning, everyone. It's nice to see the sun outside the window. Hope it stays for the rest of the day. Just before we do start, there is a disclaimer. I'm not a financial planner, so the information in this webinar is based on my personal experience, research and knowledge. Nothing I say should be taken as financial advice, and all participants are advised to consult a registered financial expert for advice suited to their unique personal circumstances. So I guess what brings me to this particular topic is that I am licensed to teach a program called Money Minded, which is run by the ANZ Bank. And I also teach Certificate 1 in Financial Literacy for the Smith family, predominantly to Year 10 and 11 students who are about to leave school and enter the workforce. So just so we get some idea through the chat room, if you can just put a series of yes, no's, just put them all in one line. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. To each of the 7 questions. You don't even need to put the question numbers next to them. And if you don't want to share that information, that's fine, or some of it. Particularly question 5, if you want to skip that, you might need to number the other questions. Question 7 needs a word answer. Any others coming through? Just about another 30 seconds and we'll kick on. Okay, thanks for those people who have responded. One of the interesting ones that comes through most of the time is number 3. A lot of people don't have a written budget. They have it in their head in some sort of shape or form, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk a little bit about debt. A couple of things you may or may not know about superannuation. I'm sure some people will, some people won't. And just a little bit about tax returns. Today we're going to look at financial goals. We're going to look at budgeting, borrowing money, debt management, the concept of risk and return. We're going to just chat about some of the scams that operate, a little bit of information about superannuation, and some information about taxation, including the new taxation rates that were passed by Parliament just the other day. Way back in session 1, Ian talked about SMART goals, and the reason that we look to put a SMART goal in place is to make sure that what we've written down makes sense to us and can in fact be achieved. So an example of a poor goal would be, I want to buy a car in 2 years' time. The information that's missing from that is it doesn't tell me how much I want to save. It doesn't tell me how long I'm going to save it for. Doesn't tell me exactly how much I need at the end. So in a SMART goal, it would be I want to save about $210 a month for 24 months to buy the car that's worth $5,000. If you do the maths, you'll see that's actually $5,040. But one of the things we need to think of is that we probably need a little bit more than the $5,000 because there's a thing called insurance that usually comes on top of the price of the car that we buy. And on average, I don't know what people pay, somewhere between $600-700 a year for insurance. And when I teach this to young kids and tell them that for them, the insurance is probably going to be closer to $2,000 because they're under 25, it suddenly puts a pretty significant impact into their saving plan, and the 210 goes up to a much higher figure. Another one, I want to save $100 per week for 52 weeks to pay for a holiday that costs $5,000. Once again, we just using some simple maths, we'd finish up with $200, and you can buy yourself a cocktail or two, or three or four, with the extra money when you enjoy the holiday. So goals that are smart really ties down to a target over a period of time, with the hope that we will achieve an end result that we wanted to in the first place. Here's a very simple budget that this particular person had. Just a young person, makes $165 a week, sat down and went through all of his expenses. This is Robert, and found out at the bottom that he had a deficit of $17.30. So obviously he's draining money out of his savings account, or he's borrowing it from somebody, but he's not earning enough to meet his commitments. And so a good exercise for anyone is to put down what you are actually spending, and then go through and have a look at, well, what are the things that that I can change? And the key things that we look at are needs and wants. What are the things that we absolutely need to be alive and to keep living, and what are the things that we'd like to have but we could do without? So just quickly whipping through these, obviously we've converted it to a weekly budget, and we've used some raw division figures. Divide by 2 for a fortnight, but we just divide by 4 for a month to give us a rough figure. So mobile phones and internet probably used to be wants, but have really become needs these days, because there's so much information that's transferred on a person's phone. You know, if a person works in has a part-time job in McDonald's or KFC or any place whatsoever, the boss is going to be communicating their shifts to them either by email or by text message. And if you're unable to ring and you need to notify the boss, then you'll send him or her a text message. So phones have really become a necessity. And then we have some wants. This guy liked his music. He liked to spend a bit more on food than his meals were being provided. He was a bit vain and spent money on haircuts and hair care products. He spent a fair bit of money on clothes. But he liked buying Christmas presents, and that was important to him. So that was one of the things that we didn't cut. And he had a bank account that had significant charges on it, which probably wouldn't be the case these days, because not many do. They have charges, but not significant. So he contacted his bank manager and was able to reduce them. Or alternatively, he changed banks, which is another thing that you can do. So it's pretty easy to trim the budget when you break the things down between what are the things I absolutely need and what are the things that I would like to have. So often, from a personal point of view, use the example of my Foxtel. I love my Foxtel. I watch a lot of documentaries, I watch a lot of cooking shows, and I watch a lot of sport on Foxtel. But I know really well that if things got tough in our household, Foxtel is something that I could do without. So for me, it's a want. And while I can afford it, wants are fine. But if I need to trim the budget, it's one of the first things that would probably, because it cost me just over $100 a month for Foxtel, which is a significant figure. And I'm sure that we've all got things that we could trim from our budget if we chose to. Okay. So one of the things that we from time to time need to do or choose to do is borrow money. And a lot of people tackle family and friends. Just put a Y in the chat box if you've ever loaned some money to somebody and it was never paid back. Nobody's loaned money and not had it paid back. No. Haven't loaned. That's really good. Any others?
I put a Y there. I've loaned money and not got it back, not expecting it back either.
Okay. So for the young, 15, 16, 17-year-olds that I teach regularly, nearly every one of them has loaned money to a friend and not got it back. And I guess the message that I try and convey out of that is that not returning the money can have a really big impact on relationships. The bigger the amount of money, the more likely the relationship will be damaged. There are a number of family situations that I know of where money was lent and not paid back, and it really caused a separation between children and parents. I certainly know of some friends who lent money to friends and it wasn't paid back, and of course they're no longer friends. Obviously, another source of money is personal loans through banks or finance companies, and they can be secured or unsecured. And I guess most of us, some of us, would have borrowed money under those conditions. The most common reason for personal loans is buying a car. And if you use the car as security, you're going to pay less interest than if you don't have any security. People who are buying houses or properties have all had a mortgage, which comes from banks and building societies. And we need to remember that the interest rates fluctuate. In my own life, and I'm sure some of you were around at the same time, in about 1972, my wife and I borrowed the princely sum of $13,700 to buy a house. We owned a block of land to have a house built. And that was borrowed at around about 7%. Within 20 months, that interest rate was almost 18%. And so we had to make some significant adjustments to our lifestyle. We hardly ever went out. We didn't turn the heater on a lot. We just put more clothes on because things were really, really tight. The good thing that came out of that was when interest rates came down again, and we were earning a little bit more money, we were able to continue to pay the loan at the higher rate, even though we could have reduced it. And that resulted in a 25-year loan being paid off in 17 and a half years. So the amount of interest that was saved was huge. So I guess the message out of that is, if you can pay more, certainly do. We talk a lot about to young people about money lenders who were, I guess, called pawnbrokers in the old days. And these are just some examples of them that you see on TV, the nimble ads, where the guy's at the airport and his wife's having a baby and the nimble character suddenly appears and solves all his problems. There's a wallet wizard one. And many people don't understand that cash converters are also money lenders. They don't just buy second-hand goods and sell them. They also loan money. The maximum amount of interest that you can charge in Australia over a year is 48%. But some of these pawnbrokers, money lenders, get around that. So they'll advertise that they have low interest rates, but when you look at their documents, they have a huge amount of fees. And there is evidence, and I'm not naming any of these people, but there is evidence that some of these money lenders can effectively charge an interest rate of about 1,000% on a loan. And many of these are relatively short term, but the amount of interest that you pay is staggeringly large. Some people might not be aware that you can borrow money from Centrelink if you are using Centrelink, or if you need to use Centrelink, and it will be paid back out of your Centrelink payments. The interest rate will be low. It's generally set at around about what the deeming rate is, which is a bit like the government interest rate, if you like. But it can be an avenue for people to get themselves out of trouble from time to time. We won't worry about whether you've had a loan and paid it off early. So we need to understand that if we get ourselves into debt, what's the impact of us? So that is, we're spending more than we're earning, or we take out a loan and we can't make the repayments. So the biggest issue related to debt is the health issues that come from it. And they're both mental and physical. People experience elevated stress levels. They generally, it affects their eating habits. They have sleeplessness and a whole lot of other symptoms that emerge when people are struggling with debt. It can affect concentration at work. It can be on your mind at times when you don't want it on your mind, like when you're driving. It can distract you. And there's certainly documented evidence of people having car accidents when they experience significant stress. So the key message is not to ignore any debt notifications that people get, because the really important thing for you to do is to get on the front foot, to make contact with the bank or the lending authority and say to them, look, I've just lost my job. And there'll be a lot of people who would have done that in the last 6 months. I've just lost my job. That's okay to tell them that, but the really best thing that you can do is to go to them with a plan. I've lost my job. I can't make my $200 a month repayments, but I can make $50 or $75 or whatever the figure is that you're able to do. Because if you go there in a conciliatory fashion and not a confrontational fashion, you're more likely to get some sympathy from the bank manager or the place where you lent the money. And just from a personal point of view, way back again in 1970, after completing my teacher's training, I decided to go to uni. So I started uni part-time in the good old days when you had to pay fees up front. So I got accepted into uni and then realised I had no money to pay the fees up front. Went and chatted to the bank manager, who kindly, for 3 years in a row, let me defer of every payment on our home loan so that I could pay the university fees. So people sometimes, I guess, get the impression that banks are ogres, and it's true to say, sometimes they can be. But by and large, I guess banks are interested in keeping customers rather than losing customers. Be aware that every credit transaction that you do gets recorded and that you establish a credit rating. And I noticed there's a new company advertising on TV at the moment saying that you can get your credit rating for free, and in nearly all websites it is free. So you can establish how good or bad your credit rating is. And it's clearly going to impact the situation when you go to borrow money. The lender is going to be checking whether you've had any defaults and what your past loan history is. So the key thing is to seek help and to seek help from people who can provide the answers. So financial advisors and accountants are clearly people who can. People like Centrelink, the Smith family, St Vincent de Paul, Anglicare, all of those charitable and government organisations can point you in the right direction. They can give you some general advice, and in some cases they would employ qualified people who can help people to solve their debt problems. So the key thing is to make sure that you talk to someone about your debt. Don't keep it inside you. Even if you've got a friend that you can share it with, it's best to get it out in the open and start to plan how to deal with it. Because in some cases, the old tow truck comes along and picks up the car if you're not making the payments. And that's a bit of a shock when I share that with young people, because, you know, they think they're bulletproof, and they don't. Even though we talk about secured loans, they don't believe that anybody would come and take their car away from them if they stop paying. And the worst thing that a lot of young people do is ignore the letters of demand that come from companies that are looking for money. And clearly, there's a whole group of people in our community right now who are receiving phone calls from banks saying, look, we've been really good to you over the last 3, 4, 5 months. You know, we've let you live without making payments, but hey, it's about time that you started to make some payments. That's probably not so true in Victoria, but I know for sure that it is absolutely true in other parts of the country where people are starting to go back to work. Not necessarily on the same money or doing the same hours or time that they were doing previously, but they do have some increased financial capacity. Just a quick word about scams. When I talk to young people about this, they think, well, you know, I'm bulletproof again, it's not going to affect me. So buying and selling. So we talk a lot about credit card fraud. And I don't know how many other people have experienced it, but I certainly have. Earlier this year, I had 5 transactions on my credit card from a dating agency in Rio de Janeiro. Never been to one. There were 5 transactions that all were between $25 and $27. and all had odd cents amounts on them. And of course, they all attracted an international transfer fee as well. Fortunately, my bank tracked it all down, and we sorted it out. Historically, many, many years ago, I cut up a credit card in Auckland in New Zealand on the day that it was due to change over, cut it into 3 pieces, put 1/3 of it in the bin in the room I was in. I put 1/3 in a bin in the corridor leading to reception, and I put 1/3 in a bin in reception. And I got home a week later and found that somebody had put the bits together, probably the cleaner, and put a transaction on my credit card. It's very easy for people to lose money if they're not careful. One of the things that I tell young people is, I think personally, it's a really good idea to have a separate bank account to do your internet transactions. It's so easy now and so quick, you know, in less than 20 seconds, I can transfer money into an account using my phone or my computer and put the money there. So if things really did go badly and it was a bogus transaction, you're not going to lose money, and you're not going to lose the identity to an account that's got money in it. So it's one of the suggestions. Dating and romance scams, I say to young people, go home and talk to your grandparents about this, because there's a huge amount of evidence of lonely single people getting involved in dating and romance scams. You know, the Russian beauties who, you know, are crying out for company and money and your company, and, you know, they want to chat to you and then they want some money from you. And it's absolutely staggering, the number of people who get caught in dating and romance scams. Fake charities. There are a lot of people, well, they used to, not while COVID's on, used to be on the streets in the city of Melbourne collecting money for charities. Clearly, the first thing is to make sure that they've got identification and that you're giving money to a legitimate charity. Investment scams, we've probably all heard about them, where people were promised huge returns. There was one historically that got in the news this week because the Bendigo Bank was involved in it. It was called growing pine trees very quickly and selling them for profit. There was a company called Great Plantations where people were promised enormous returns on their investment. It all went sour for a couple of reasons. In some places the trees didn't grow, and in some places they got burnt down. And unlike good old Australian eucalypts, if you burn a pine tree down, that's it. It doesn't grow back again. So there's a whole lot of investment scams. One of the ones that people might not be aware of is that there are people who sit outside Centrelink and they watch people go in and out, particularly young people, and they look at their body language, and they can tell whether they've come out with a job or without a job. And so they strike up a relationship with them, and over 1 or 2 chats, they make the promise that they can find them a job. However, what's the catch? You've got to pay me some money. As a general rule, that would be somewhere between $200 and $500. And they give you a piece of paper and it says, here's the job, here's the place you have to go to, here's the person you have to report to, and here's the time you have to be there. So the young person, all excited about having a job, rocks up on Monday morning, you know, to XYZ Manufacturing, and finds they have no idea of a job. So, you know, it's a trap that young people need to be made aware of. So Rotarians, if you've got some grandchildren or you've got some younger children in your life, pass the message on. And then there are the people who get hold of threats and extortions, and they're the people who hijack your car or hijack your computer, and they demand money from people. There are less of those than there are others, but we certainly need to be aware that there are scams all around us, and the scammers get really clever. There was a group from somewhere in South America who were putting little plastic devices in the slots of ATMs, and you could hardly see them. They were clear. They had a clear plastic edging, but when you put your card in, it read everything on the card. So they'd leave it there for a period of time, go and pick it off the ATM, and then use all of the data that they had. Now, the slots on ATMs are nowadays more difficult to do. So I tell young kids, just run your finger around the edge of the slot if it's got a straight slot, and see if there's any ridges there that you can feel. And if there is, go and use another machine. excuse me, let's have a little look at superannuation. Normally when I do this with kids who are working, I ask them, do you have more than one superannuation account? And it's amazing how many young kids will have more than one part-time job, and they'll have more than one superannuation fund because they haven't taken the trouble. And just of interest, in the budget just this week, there is a move. There are some changes to superannuation rules that will make it almost impossible for somebody to have more than one superannuation account. They'll have one and it will carry them with them. I didn't read all the details, but the headline note suggested that that was the aim of that. The answer is, do we have compulsory superannuation? Does everybody get superannuation? Do people know how much the superannuation is? So the answer to does everyone have compulsory superannuation, everyone who works? The answer is actually no, because there are times when people are not eligible for superannuation. So how much does my employer contribute? So at the moment, it's 9.5%, and the government had a grand plan to increase it to 12%. It's interesting that when superannuation in Australia was first established, the government's aim then was 15%, to let it grow up to 15%. And we all know that it's had some stops and starts along the way. It sat at 9 for a long time and then it grew. And the government now has to decide whether they implement the next stage of that, which would take it up to 10% and then increments of 0.5% till it got to 12. Bearing in mind that it's an additional burden on employers. And when it first was introduced, we all experienced very, very low or no wage increases to allow employers to be able to make those contributions. And from memory, I think the first contribution was 2%, or somebody might correct me on that. It was very low. So it has grown significantly since it started. So what's the calculation based on? So it's based on normal earnings. Okay, it's not based on whether you get an allowance for this or an allowance for that. Those things are excluded. Normal earnings. And you must earn $450 in a month to be eligible for superannuation. So the work I do for the Smith family is ad hoc. So sometimes I might just do a short session for them, which would be a couple of hours. I get a fee for that, but I don't get any superannuation. If I do a couple of day session, obviously I do get super. And for an under 18 person, they must work 30 hours in a week. And for young people, that is particularly important for them to check when, if it's school holidays and they do a lot more shifts and they work more than 30 hours in a week, you know, they need to make sure that the boss is putting the money into their superannuation. And I guess we're lucky these days that, lucky in many ways, that we have computers that do all of those calculations. But we need to understand that behind those calculations is a set of rules that somebody has had to program correctly. And we've seen a plethora of companies put their hands up and say, mea culpa, because of incorrect payments to people over the last, in the last 12 months they put their hand up, but the payments go back a long time. And, you know, they're big organisations like Bunnings and Coles and Woolworths and many other companies have been caught out for incorrectly paying wages. Okay, can you pay extra super? And the answer is obviously yes, in two ways. You can pay it as an after-tax contribution, so you decide after you've got your net income that you can pay some money into super, or you can salary sacrifice it. And particularly for people who are able to do that, and more particularly as you are nearing retirement age, if you're able to chuck some lump sums into your super, it boosts your super account significantly. I didn't have super for a lot of my early life, and then when I changed roles, I used the super that I had because I could take it all out in those days and started again when I was 49. But because in the latter years of my employment, I was able to put significant sums of money in, sums of $30,000 and $40,000 a year, it helped boost my superannuation to the stage where I can now live comfortably from it. So ask the kids to guess how much extra you're allowed to pay. At the moment, it's currently set at 25,000, but it goes up and down all the time. And I'm pretty certain it's still 25,000. I have to confess that I haven't checked that figure this year, whether there was any change. Somebody might let me know. So one of the things that I use to attract young people to learn a little bit about superannuation is to do with the insurances that are attached to superannuation. So you automatically get 1 unit of each of these, of death cover, of total and permanent disability, and of income protection. Okay, and you can opt for extra units if you want to. Interestingly enough, I got an email from my superannuation fund just earlier this year when just before, no, sorry, it wasn't this year, it was last year, when I turned 70, and they said to me I was no longer eligible for death cover on my insurance, which was interesting. Didn't realise that at the time, and I think the new superannuation rules are looking to extend that to 74. So what comes out is all of those insurances, but when you look at the cost of them, they are really very, very low for the cover that you get. My wife was able to stay at home because she was unwell for almost a year before she was eligible for her superannuation because of these insurances. So there are obviously fees. There are some superannuation funds, believe it or not, who have a zero fee. And others that have a significantly higher fee. And as a general rule, it's the industry funds that have the lower fees, and some of the funds that also have to look after their shareholders, like banks, AMP, and I'm not picking on any of them. Organisations like that invariably have higher fees because they're not just having to look after members, they're having to look after members and shareholders as well. And most of you will be aware, and if you're not, you need to be, that you can choose the level of risk in your superannuation fund and you can change it over time. Young people tend to be likely to take higher risks, so they're quite happy, and they've got low balances, so they're quite happy to put money into more aggressive investment options. As people get older and get closer to retirement and move into retirement and turn their superannuation into a monthly payment, they obviously are probably looking for something that's more conservative or balanced. But you can change them over time, and you need to be aware of what, for each particular fund, what they mean by conservative, and they might have a different name for it, what they mean by balanced, and what they mean by aggressive. So we're talking about cash, we're talking about shares, we're talking about shares Australian, shares overseas, we're talking about investments in property. And as we move into more and more of those, then we get to the more aggressive. If they hit the mark, then obviously we're really happy. But they can also, particularly as has happened in the last within the last 12 months, superannuation balances have decreased because of share returns. And also share returns this year are lower because of a directive from APRA, which suggested that companies ought not pay dividends as high as they paid previously, and suggested that they ought to be probably up to 50% less, because APRA is suggesting that companies need to have a bit of a nest egg, because at that stage we didn't really know what COVID was going to be like going forward. We probably still don't know, to be quite honest. So there's also a thing called a binding nominee, that is, who gets your money if you die. And it's really important to make sure it's current. So when a young person takes out superannuation, they probably, not all of them, but most of them nominate one or both of their parents as their binding nominee. And when they form a relationship or get married, they forget to change that. Now, one of the things the government has done is they've made it now compulsory for the superannuation fund to notify you. Can't remember whether it's every 2 or 3 years. You have to notify the superannuation fund on a regular basis. They have to write to you and say, tell me who your binding nominee is. And it's a document that's a legal document. You have to get witnessed by an authority, police or JP. and send it back to the superannuation fund. So the area where people get caught out most is where relationships break up, marriages break up, or relationships break up, and people forget to change the binding nominee. That can be one hell of a dogfight. If you've still got an ex-wife who you don't want to have anything, the sole beneficiary of your superannuation fund if you die. So it's really important to keep that up to date and current. So just a quick run through of where does the money come from and where does it go? Where does our money go? Obviously, we have a federal government that collects money through primarily taxes. That is PAYE, income taxes, GST, capital gains, for examples. But they also collect a whole lot of money through a stack of charges. If you want to buy a passport, not cheap. If you want to bring a prohibited item in a country, they'll take it from you and fine you. So there's a whole range of areas where the federal government gets money. They're just two examples. Obviously, the state government gets money from things like land tax, payroll tax, lots of fees and charges, and fines, particularly traffic fines. So some of the things that the state government might get money from, if you go to the museum, if you go to a national park, you know, a lot of government-owned enterprises charge entry fees. So the state picks up money, and clearly at the local level, they pick up money primarily through rates, but also through fees. Got to register your dog or cat, there's a fee. The council looks after parking, fines. And I've forgotten the figure, but it's millions and millions that the Melbourne City Council gets from parking fines every year. It could be tens of millions, but you know, it's a huge source of revenue for the City of Melbourne and the surrounding council. City of Yarra does nicely out of fines as well. And many years ago, when I lived in Richmond, they got a bit of money out of me as well. Okay. So looking at taxation, we get taxed for the Medicare levy. Okay, it's currently 2%, but it doesn't get taxed on a weekly basis. It gets taxed at the end of the year. There's obviously income tax, and that can be either income tax that are paid by companies who don't pay payroll tax, or it can be paid by individuals. And if it's paid by individuals, it's called PAYG, pay as you go. And it means that your boss takes money out of your wages every week. The thing to remember is, particularly for young people or people who do irregular shifts, there might be weeks when the boss doesn't take tax out, and there might be weeks when he does. And that's because you have to earn $18,200 minimum a year before you pay tax. And what the boss has to do is he has to calculate what he's going to pay you on a week as if it was a full year. So he needs to work out what, you know, let's say $200 a week is. $200 a week by 50 weeks is only $10,000. So if it's $400 a week by 50 weeks, it's going to be 20-odd thousand. So it's whatever you're earning in that particular week that will determine what you're being taxed, not your yearly, necessarily your yearly money, because you don't get taxed on a yearly basis. We try and get some money back on a yearly basis, and we'll have a look at that shortly. There's obviously payroll tax. And people who run businesses, not many people are aware that if you have a business in the country, Victorian government has a much lower payroll tax rate. But you've got to have a significant payroll of almost $650,000 a year before you are able to pay tax, or a monthly payroll bill of about $54,000 a year before payroll tax is payable. So the incentive is obviously to attract businesses to regional areas, and payroll tax varies from state to state. And generally companies that operate in multiple states will pay their payroll tax in the state where their head office is. And then there's this wonderful thing called capital gains tax that many people are aware of when they sell a property. So if you've got an investment property and you buy it, you know, and sell it off in 10 years' time, just be aware that the government's going to take a slice of that, significant slice of that as capital gains tax, because the government is saying that the money that you've got from that sale of property is in fact income for you, and it's income that should be taxed. Now, it's not taxed at a PAYG rate. It's a formula. Look it up on the internet if you want to know what the formula is. It's not straightforward. It's not a flat figure. It's a stepped staged formula. It's got several parts to it. And the other one is shares. People who get into buying and selling shares. If you make a profit on the shares, then you're up for capital gains tax as well on those. I might add, and I'm not a financial counsellor, but I know you can carry forward losses on shares as well, because my tax accountant tells me I can do that occasionally, which just probably means I've made a bad decision in the first place, possibly. There's also fringe benefits tax, which applies to things that that the company might supply for you to use, and they could be predominantly they're on cars, but they can also be on entertainment. So if you're meeting a client in a cafe, that's potentially a fringe benefit. And if you receive gifts from people. There's also this wonderful thing called the luxury car tax, and it deters young people from having thoughts about buying a very expensive car, not just when they're young, but any time in their life, because they sit back and say, that's not fair. But it exists in Australia. So if a car is a non-fuel efficient car in Australia and it's worth more than $88,000, then you're going to pay this luxury car tax on the amount over $88,000. So if the car cost $88,000, then if there was, sorry, $88,000, that figure's wrong on that. Just put that in this morning. Be aware that you pay 33% over on top of the $88,000. If you have a fuel efficient vehicle, then the tax is, the $88,000 is the $8,000 extra tax. No, that's wrong. I've forgotten what it is. Just forget that one. So if you've got a fuel efficient vehicle, and that means that it has a rating of at least 7 litres per kilometre or less. So if it's under that, then the rate at which the capital gains tax kicks in is $75,526, and for other vehicles it's $67,525. Now I know where my calculation came from. The 88,000 is the difference between 67,000 and 88,000. Bit of a blank moment there. So in fact, the $88,000 car would cost you $94,143, which is a significant increase in the price of the car. So it's important to be aware of that. So let's have a look at what the government did for us this week. They changed the tax rates. They raised so the bottom step didn't change. You still don't pay any tax up to $18,200. They raised the second step from $37,000 to $45,000. So that's where you pay 19 cents in the dollar. From $45,000, they raised the next level from $90,000 to $120,000, and that's where you pay 32.5 cents in the dollar. And then from $120,000 to $180,000, and the $180,000 was always there, you pay 37 cents, and if it's over $180,000, you pay 45 cents. So for young people, I need to spend a bit of time really explaining how this actually works, because they immediately think, oh, if I earn $180,000, I'm going to pay 45 cents tax. No, it's a step thing. You calculate the first block and then add on the second block and then add on the third block and add on the fourth block. So how do our tax rates compare? Compared to United Kingdom, they have a lower tax rate than us, 45% over $290,000. The USA has a lower tax rate, 39.6%. And in Russia, there's a flat tax rate of 13% across all levels of income, and it's one of the lowest in the world. They've also got a lot of people, I guess, but it's interesting. So Canada's top tax rate is 29%, But Sweden's and Denmark's are very high, 57% and 55.56%. However, on the flip side, Australia has one of the lowest GST or VAT, value-added taxes, in the world. So the average of all other countries is 19%. New Zealand is 15%. It went up a year or two ago. It was 12.5% for a long time. It went up to 15%. And I think there's absolutely no doubt that in our lifetime, even though we older Rotarians have less time to live than some of the young people in the audience, but the GST will increase. We have a hybrid GST where some things are taxable and some aren't. To my knowledge, and I haven't researched every single country, but in most countries of the world, it's on everything. There are no exceptions, like food, education, and thank goodness they changed last year the stupid impost that was placed on women in relation to sanitary products, which was just a stupid thing to do from the start. So it'll go up. It'll probably go up by 2.5% or possibly 5%, or it might be that it will change and everything will be taxed at the 10%. It's really, really interesting. I used to work for Spotless, the outsourcing company, and if we did catering in a boardroom, and we also ran a cafeteria in the building, if we took the top off a bottle of mineral water, it was taxable, and if we didn't take the top off it, it wasn't taxable. And that's how stupid the rules about what isn't taxable were. So when we did functions, it wasn't taxable because the lids were on. If we sold it over the counter and we knew that it was going to be consumed in the cafeteria, not that we took the top off, but the customer did, then it was taxable. Okay, so let's have a look quickly at a tax scenario. You're employed, and we'll have a look at the figures. You've already paid $6,750 tax. Now, I know the figures on this are a little bit small, and that's why I need to put the specs on. So here's you sitting down to do your tax return, and you know that you've earned $44,000 in a year. You've received interest on a bank account of $22, and at today's rates, you'd have to have a hell of a lot of money in the bank to get $22 worth of interest, because it's about 0.25%. You're being very honest, and you tell the ATO that you've won $120 in tax lotto. So then you look at the deductions that you think you can claim. You want to claim the payment for the accountant who did your tax return. You want to make a claim for everyday clothes because you have to wear clothes to the office, and they have to be of a certain standard because the company has a dress standard, not dress rules, a dress standard. You want to claim the TAFE course that you want to do to improve your skills and do business administration. You've donated some money to charities, and you want to claim the rent that you pay because you live in the family home. And you want to claim the car expenses that you use to travel to work. So let's have a look what the tax officer is going to say. You can probably think about, don't need to tell me, I'll get the kids to think about which ones they think are not claimable. Okay. So here's the tax that would have happened if we'd done our tax last week. Okay. So where's mine now? So our income was $44,000. We received interest of $22, but the tax department doesn't care about any money that you win. You could win whatever you like in tax lotto and it's not taxable. You can win money on the horses. You can win money in a raffle, and none of it's taxable. So the tax department says that if you get an accountant or a tax agent to do your tax return, you can claim the cost. Can you claim everyday clothes you wear in the office? No, you can't. Can you claim the TAFE course? Yes, you can. Can you claim donations to charity? Yes, you can. Can you pay the rent that you pay at home? The answer is no, because if we let you claim the rent, everybody who pays a mortgage would want to claim their mortgage. And the car expenses to travel to and from work are not claimable, but I make sure that people are aware that if your boss asks you to travel from point A to point B in your car on work business, he must either reimburse you or you can claim reimbursement through tax for that. So Where we go? Oops. So here's what happens when we crunch the numbers. Okay, we started off with income of 44,000. We've now got income of 44,000 and should be $22. Go through the process, and I'm not going to go through all of the steps because you can add them up. So what happens is, in the end, we've paid 6,000. Oh, sorry, these are new tax rates. I didn't put the old ones in. Or did I skip a slide? Pre-budget. Sorry. I know it's a problem because it wants to jump from slide to slide. Anyway. No, I've mucked up my first slide. We'll just do the new ones. We finished up with a return of $771. And I think under the old one, and I'm not sure why it let me, why it's just going to the next slide, because there are figures that normally come in there. Don't worry about it. I slipped this one in this morning because I was waiting for the tax rates to change. So now, previously, if we calculated the tax, we would have had to use 3 steps. Because remember, $39,000 was the cut-off point. We're now going up to 45,000, so we only need to look at 2 tax scales to calculate what the new tax rate is. So, you know, just there's only a very small, there are only small deductions here that people are claiming, but for this person, not only are they going to be paying less tax, but the other thing about the new tax rates is that the government have made them retrospective back to the 1st of July. And having worked on a couple of payroll projects, I know that there'll be some payroll programmers tearing their hair out about how they're going to go back and do the back calculation. They're going to have to run their payroll again from the 1st of July up until the current week or whenever they change the tax rates in order to do the calculation. And I don't know whether that's going to, I haven't seen in the legislation whether it's going to be back paid to people or how it's going to work, but it's claimable back, or whether you have to wait till the tax return. It might well be that you have to wait till you get your tax return because you've already paid quite a bit too much tax, which will mean come next year, there'll be people getting some fairly significant lump sum payments that they weren't expecting. I'm sorry about that previous slide. And that's it.